All right, I think I finally figured out how to run a 350Z axle with the stock FRS diff. I ended up dropping my entire subframe because doing this on the car just didn't really give me enough room, especially on the floor. So here it is. This is a 350Z axle and a 350Z hub running on my OEM FRS knuckle and subframe. That's really it. So what I ended up having to do was buy a spacer here. This is my custom adapter that goes into the diff. This is a spacer from FDF, I believe. And I ended up putting the bolts through and welding them and then kind of chopping them flush so I'd have clearance against the diff here. There's really not much room. And then bolting, I only did 3 for now. I'm gonna do the other 3 in a minute. So I cut all of that out. I'm going to cut more of this just so it clears the axle. It's clearing by like a freaking hair. It's not touching, but you know, under movement and drifting, it's gonna touch. So I'm gonna chop more of that, and then I'm gonna plate this on top of here once I figure out what room I need for the axle there, for the axle boot. And yeah, I mean, everything lined up as it should. All right, so I'm gonna do a quick rundown of the parts that I bought. So I had these custom stub adapters made from Lussier Motorworks. He custom made these for me. They were not cheap. This is an IS300 stub here, shaft. The shaft from the IS300 stub onto the Togue Factory 350Z adapter plate. So you can run, it's for 240SXs to run 350Z axles, if I remember correctly. So you'd have to do this anyway. Then I went and bought the FDF 10mm axle spacer to kind of fit onto there, just to give me a little more room, because the FRS is completely different. I mean, it's super wide compared to the 350Z. So I have those 2 running for the axle side. Then I have the 350Z wheel hub with this, I forgot where I got this spacer, but this is another axle spacer for the hub side that kind of just gives you a little more room. This is 15 mil, I believe. That's 10 mil, so 25 mil altogether. And that is what's on this side right now. So I've got the spacer inside of here, inside of the knuckle there. I've got the spacer right there on my custom adapter, and the axle seems to fit just fine. I know with this mod you do have to notch the 350Z axle nut because it'll be right up flush with it, right up flush here. So you basically have to turn it into a castle nut just so it doesn't back out. So I'm gonna do that at the very end. And yeah, I did have to cut a big portion out here, but this is plated. I plated this when I did the PBM risers. So that's a pretty thick piece there. It's not gonna affect anything. I may throw plate in here just to make sure it stays rigid. But yeah, you essentially have to chop right up to this weld here, all the way across there, and then down, and then down. So you have a piece that looks like, it's technically that piece. That's what I cut out. 6 bolts right there, axle nut. Give it some motivation. There you go, slides right out. So that is a 350Z axle compared to the FRS axle. Big difference. I had to tape that because it was leaking. But yeah, huge difference. So this is what the stub looks like with the spacer and the studs in there. And I welded them on. Just used a little titanium 140, little gas, and that should hold just fine. Now what I'm gonna do is take my flap disc right here, and I'm gonna grind these down, these backs, the heads of the bolts. I'm gonna grind them down almost flush. I'm gonna leave the weld so it's still holding on nice and tight. And once I do that, I'll be able to push it into the diff and then put the axle in, turn it, see if I have any clearance issues. And if I don't, then I'm all set with, honestly, the entire swap. Then I can put everything back in, test it, and see what goes, you know, how everything goes from there. Everything turns great. I'm not really too worried. I am a little worried about the camber just because there's so much. It's extending the axle more than it needs to be extended. And truth be told, I added so much camber, I added -6 degrees because I continuously broke axles, and I figured if I induce slip by adding camber and running, you know, like 40-50 psi, it should be fine. But clutch kicking, even with this camber and, you know, high pressure in the tires, it still broke the axles. And I'm pretty sure a big culprit is that these are AutoZone lifetime warranty recycled axles, so they're not OEM quality, and they really can't take abuse in my experience. I'm sure other people have had better luck with low power cars and, you know, smaller tires, but I'm generally running a 265 and I'm running 20 psi, so it's a good amount of power to grip ratio. Even these are 245s and they're federal, so they're, even at low tread, they're pretty sticky. So I'm hoping this really solves that issue for me. All right, so this was the first attempt to get it moving. It's in first gear right now. And this side is working perfect, but this other side right here is it's a little finicky. It moves every now and then. But I did press the gas and I videotaped and it does move. So I might just have something a little too tight, but it does move. I'm gonna throw everything on the caliper, the wheel, and see if I can at least move it in the driveway. And another thing is my speed sensors aren't fitting in there, my ABS sensors. So I may have to figure out something with those. So the car drives. I drove it up and down the street. Those are the FRS axles. The 350Z axles are inside, and it sounds good. It moves well. My only issue now is my speed sensors. They didn't fit in the hole of the knuckle anymore because of the difference in axle size. Yeah, those axles are a lot bigger. Can barely see anything, but yeah. All right, so I'm gonna try to figure out the speed sensor, and then if that works, then this is a successful swap. But right now it is driving. I can move it, and I'm happy so far. We're moving, boys. I had to do a lot of work to make this work, but she's moving. I'll explain in a minute. Alright, this is the end of the 350Z swap video. Everything is working, the car's driving. I still believe that I could use a little more space between the axle and the hub just to give it more cushion room. But right now it's running great. It's a little noisy, I think, just because some things are touching, but most of it is free. I only had issues on the passenger side for some reason, and that might be because the axle, it looked a little iffy. I got it from the junkyard, which is a nice thing about this swap. You can get these axles anywhere. I called the junkyard. They had it on the shelf ready to go. So that's the great part about this. The hardest part about the swap was the ABS module, because you cannot run your ABS sensors, speed sensor in the rear, you get a code and it throws your car in limp mode. So essentially what you have to do is swap your sensor wiring. So basically your wiring from the back is now swapped to the front and the front is to the back. And I can make a separate video on that if people are gonna do this. But that was the hardest part, just figuring that out and you know, making sure all those wires were secure. But you know, quick rundown. I have 350Z hubs, wheel hubs from Amazon. I have 350Z axles. I'm running OEM knuckles and an OEM subframe and the OEM diff. I have a spacer that goes between the wheel and the, well, it goes between the hub and the axle. I believe I got it from Drift HQ. I also have a spacer between the axle and the diff that I got from, oh fuck, maybe Togue Factory or something. I'm not sure where I got that one from. But I have two spacers, one's 15 mil, one's 10 mil. The axle's in the middle of that. And then I have my custom stubs that I had made from an IS300 stub and 350Z adapter plates from Togue Factory. I had to chop a lot out of the subframe, as you guys saw in the video. And other than that, that's really it. I have 5x114 wheels already, so now this is 5x114.3. And everything else is normal under there. The wiring that I'm talking about is right here. This is your ABS module, so you push that and this whole thing comes off. And I actually I did it like this. I just swapped the wires like that so I could see if they work. I'm gonna go back and solder these and make it nice and put a loom around it. But my next step is getting an alignment and getting rid of the camber. I think getting rid of the camber will allow me to have more space with the axle, because right now it's being stretched out because my lower control arms are kicked out. I have -6 degrees of camber. You can't tell because I'm running almost -12 up front, but yeah, there's a good amount back there. So I'm gonna try to zero that out or get it as close to zero as possible, and that should give me a little more axle play. And after I do that, then I'll try to do some drifts and see if they actually hold up. My biggest fear is that they break, but they're a lot easier to swap than the FRS axles, and they're way more plentiful, so I'll be able to find these anywhere. I literally got one yesterday, like I said, and they had it on the shelf. And I have an extra coming in the mail right now because eBay fucked up and sent me the wrong one. They listed it as the wrong axle, and they're sending me a replacement right now, so I have one spare. So yeah, that's it for this. My next thing is getting the wide body that I bought onto the car. It should be here hopefully by the end of next week or the week after that. And then I can start buttoning, I can't say that word well. I can get this thing together. I'm just gonna get the thing together. I'm gonna figure out paint for it at some point, most likely the same color. And that's really it. So yeah, 350Z axle conversion was a success. That's it.